Chapter 12. Behind the Walls of the Hermit Kingdom. The Juche ideology, Juche Sasong in Korean, or Chuche, approximately Juche, is the official state ideology of North Korea and the political system based on it. The core principle of the Juche ideology since the 1970s has been that man is the master of everything and decides everything. New World Encyclopedia, March 26, 2024. It was 5 days since the dear leader declared a patriotic year. In celebration, the country was expected to double vigilance in all tasks and spend serious time in devotion. Everyone knew something happened at Kyumsusan Palace of the Sun, and what footage was circulated again and again on the country's state news broadcasts had the appearance of legitimacy. Its interpretation. This hung like a cloud on the people. Ultimately, the apparently supernatural footage could mean many things, but whatever those things happened to be in actuality, they had the regime upset, and that's all that mattered to the beleaguered masses under them. Military personnel, if it were possible, became even more zealous, and a number of black markets evaporated. This was of chief concern to Insu, but he was too strong and hardy to let worry tempt him. Born on the day of victory in the Great Fatherland Liberation War, July 27, 1953, year 42 on the Juche calendar, Insu beheld the entire arc of the country's socialist, then monarchical trajectory, right into its present state of dictatorial corruption. In truth, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, was less a country and more a mafia-run prison, at least by the 2020s. In its early days, the country was rich as it was a proxy arm of the Soviet Union and so enjoyed their financial support. When Insu was in his late 30s, the trouble began. The Soviet Union collapsed, and this even impacted neighboring China, though there were still allies among other Eastern Bloc countries in terms of Marxist ideal. Those allies themselves fell on hard times. The 90s were turmoil and brokenness. The regime was revealed for what it was to those who would allow themselves to see. But the narrative of the country was that DPRK citizens were the beneficiaries of survival in the wake of terrible Holocaust wrought of international war. So citizens felt lucky to live where they did and believed the world beyond to be worse. When the starvation came and the planned economy fully succumbed, powerful black markets were born of necessity. Without some sort of finger in a black market here or there, you or your family would die of hunger, at least in the 90s. Even the government began dabbling in diverse criminality, from counterfeiting to arms deals to drugs deals and everything in between. There were no boundaries on securing funds for the state, who in reality were the dynastic family of the dear leader and symbiotic parliament. By the end of his 40s, at the turn of the century, Insu knew two things. The government was evil, and he needed to be free of them. This led to a deep involvement with varying black market activities until Insu got his hands on the first Bible he ever saw. It came over with a clutch of the books via balloon in the early days when that was a lot more feasible. Now such tactics were known along barbed wire borders. Oh, they still worked, but it was less likely. His task at that time was one of point-to-point delivery through covert means. He picked up the ballooned-in Bibles and dropped them wherever he was supposed to. He got a little money on the side. That first time, Insu kept one of the Bibles. Conversion took years, and black market duties were as necessary as the appearance of proper service to the dear leader. But eventually, Insu internalized what he gradually read and began to apply such things in his life. Living out in North Korea was a game of open espionage. Every year, more statues of the departed patriarch of North Korea, the great leader, and his son and his living grandson graced every block and district of the country. Exponential idolatry. All buildings were portraits of North Korea's dynastic patriarchs by law. Songs were played on loudspeakers through the cities in accompaniment to ruthless nonstop propaganda. Of course men would rebel, and where would that rebellion take them in a land making escape impossible and doing its dead-level best to invade all aspects of personal life? It would take them to new kingdoms of thought, of course, to thoroughfares of the soul. The people could, if they were unable to leave physically, escape to God himself. In times when extreme patriotism was demanded of the people, it's easy to see how those with a faith in God and not the dynasty might feel suffocated and suppressed by such circumstances. But not Insu, for like many before him, he found the loophole. Namyang train station was where he worked in the day, nestled up against the Chinese border in the northernmost point of North Korea. The train from that station ran all along Chinese and Russian borders before turning south along the coast, following the sea to Ryongban Station, and beyond that either to the country's interior or further along the coast, depending on which line you took. The seaside tracks led through varying connections, stations, and tunnels, and eventually to Pyongyang. On his way home, from the station in the north, Insu followed train tracks at the furthermost point of their line several miles until a place where he knew the terrain well and kept a humble house in foothills unknown to authorities. Indeed, the secret police were ruthless and ever-present, but they were low on resources and often leaned on deduction over discovery. So there were always holes in the net, and a small enough fish can get through just about anything. As the sun set behind, Insu waved a jovial goodbye to his foreman and took up the national anthem, something expected of all workers. He belted it out as he strode along the tracks. Shine bright, shine bright, you dawn on this land so far, the country of 3,000 ri. So rich in silver and in gold you are, 5,000 years of your history. Our people ever were renowned and sage and rich in cultural heritage. And as with heart and soul we strive, Korea shall forever thrive. And in the spirit of Mount Pektu, with the love of toil that shall never die, with the will of iron fostered by the truth, we'll lead the whole world by and by. We have the might to foil the angry sea. Our land more prosperous still shall be. As by the people's will we strive, Korea shall forever thrive. In a few minutes, Insu was miles away, where he knew he was utterly alone and could not be seen. He kept singing, now projecting at the top of his lungs through the loophole. Only a close listener would even notice the words were different. Now he sang, shine bright, O God, on a land unfair, the country of the millions bleed. Our only riches and Lord you are, we know you hold our history. Our people ever are wounded and faint and hunted down to the final saint, but you're in our heart and soul alive, your kingdom shall forever thrive. Your throne is higher than Mount Pektu, with the love of Christ we shall never die. With your will as our own, rooted in the truth, we'll lead the whole world to your light. We have the faith to waltz on angry seas, eternity more prosperous shall be. As by dear Jesus will we thrive, Lord, make our brethren come alive. It seems even in distant lands there's a particularly saintly instinct built around repurposing melodies with spiritual lyricism. For Insu, there was a greater design at work here. The intention of a person changes communication. For the Christian in North Korea, who must always live on a razor's edge between right and wrong, in a corruption state with no escape, and certain death when public faith is ascertained, all words must be in code. For Insu and those on the thin, narrow, dangerous way like him, there was no question of if life ended in a concentration camp, but when. And so this was his daily preparation and meditation between work, smuggling, and sleep. So he sang the songs like all the rest, but maybe in public when he said, "Dear Leader," he didn't necessarily think of the regime. He and others like him would sing and pray openly, framing prayers to God as effervescent passion for the dear leader. In a land where a cult of personality produced legitimate emotion of this variety, where indeed such exultations praising the regime were sincere, Insu and others like him just seemed more patriotic than most, which certainly protected them. But Insu knew the truth, and saints like him knew the truth, and God knew the truth, and in public those who knew these things could identify one another, and so they acted accordingly. There was a certain way in which the words were framed, when by dear leader one really meant dear God. If Insu were praying for the welfare of a friend, he might say, "Oh, dear leader, may your graceful spirit rest on the body of poor Daquan and his inflammation, so that he may thrive in your land again." Someone might raise an eyebrow, but the words were coded properly, so none were suspicious. Hiding in plain sight, in the world's poorest country, was the world's richest church. Truly, the riches of the saint are not those of the bank, but those of the soul, and where life is so broken, only the riches of the soul can be attained. In the worst of circumstances, the best of spirits are forged, a severe mercy and glory and gift, but only certain souls are given, because only such souls have the strength to bear it, perhaps. So Insu sang the patriotic songs more passionately, and any salute or regard he seemed to send to any portrait or statue was sent to God himself in the mind of Insu, and so God indeed heard him with that context. On he marched along the train tracks in the evening, still 4 miles where he would rest. Even though the darkness had come, he continued singing, thinking about his life as he went, avoiding any meditation on the increasingly insistent cold. In 2029, Insu reached his 76th year, but he was strong as an ox, if thin as a rail, and knew how to live. His lungs were healthy, and his singing was flat as it could get, which was probably another reason he managed to blend in. Nobody wanted to listen to him yowl. They just tuned him out. 2 more miles. Insu reached this verse. "Your throne is higher than Mount Pektu. With the love of Christ we shall never die." Unexpectedly he heard up a bluff, rolling away from the track, someone complete the stanza. "With your will as our own, rooted in truth, we'll lead the whole world to your light." Insu dropped his pack. He always kept a pack on him for the journey from work, turned, and tensed himself, wondering if this was the day they sent him to die in the camps. Then he saw a ghost emerge from the shadows with a devil's grin, and his fear melted like ice on a fire. "Snake! Look at you, not a day over 10,000. And the man gave him a hug. The two admired one another in the early evening. Insu laughed and wiped at his eyes. "You're dead, Snake! I heard the news. Those Jap bastards blew you up." "Ha! No, I blew me up so I could escape Russian bastards." "Your accent is still good." "Thanks. Here, let me help." And Sneg Mellor took up the pack, nestling it over his own. It hardly weighed anything. "Where have you been?" "Here, there. Spent years with the American bastards, then with the Turkish bastards." "So many bastards," Insu laughed, shaking Mellor's shoulder. Did you bring Bibles?" "Yeah, I brought Bibles, and booze, and smokes, and a few motorcycles, but I might need to use them first. And other supplies I'll tell you about." "So, mostly Bibles. Well, they're the most illegal, no? I've got a piece on me, too. Several, in fact. But those aren't for sale." He patted holsters. "Are you really an angel, Snake? Tell me. You don't look a day older." "It's been 20 years. Wait till you see me under light. My face, not so young." "But your voice, ha! Those were the days, weren't they?" "How's life been, Insu?" "Hell, but for Christ. So, paradise." And he made a comical gesture. Mellor Sneg snorted, then chuckled. "You North Korean Jesus people are another breed. I thought I had it hard, but you guys, I don't know how you do it, Insu. All I see up there, stars." And he nodded to the sky. "Ah, but what is beyond the stars?" Mellor was going to laugh and say something flippant, but He suddenly got an image in the back of his head of the man with the mustache coming through the portal in the casino and found himself rubbing his chin instead. I don't know, old boy. I don't know. But, well, let's get to your house. I'll tell all. I come the right day, yes? Yes, yes. I'm in the mountains tonight. Yonji has me covered in the building. Wow. After 20 years, you're still in the same routine. Ah, Snag isn't dead. Insu laughed and shook his shoulder again. They continued up for another hour until they were in the hills. Mellor found it ironic that he had taken the name Mellor from North Korea, but went by Snag whenever he came through the tunnel. It was a tradition he would of course maintain, as it was best to make it difficult to trace his activities, and aliases thickened investigatory fog. Still, it made him chuckle. The cottage Insu lived in was the same as the cannibals Mellor escaped. He was the one to set it up for Insu. It was a sort of cache and relay station. That old couple were already long forgotten by the state when they almost ate young Sneg for dinner. When he blinded one and beat the other with a rake, he actually dealt critical injuries that took a year to ripen into death. When Mellor came back fresh out of Russian jail, he found a grave and a fully decomposed corpse. Only bones remained. It made him feel strange. Here were the cannibals that would have eaten him. But they did care for him a number of months, and in the mind of a child, a month feels like a year or longer. If you think back, you'll notice this. One summer felt eternal, and becomes the standard by which the rest are judged. So was the case here. That old Korean couple, who were just going to eat him, were the closest thing Mellor knew to a mother and father. So when he returned to find them dead, it made him sad in a way that confused him, because he knew he should be glad they got what they deserved. In the land of poverty, though, he knew their cannibalism was something impressed on them, not sought by them. In the maturity of years, he felt pain for them. It wasn't enough to keep him from repurposing the old cottage, though, and he never felt that he killed them. It might have been true, but he didn't try to eat them. There was a distinction. Mellor painted the cottage, restored it, made endless trips in and out of the tunnel with supplies, and by the time he was done, unless you took a radar-sat heat camera and attached it to a satellite, then pointed that camera at just the right point on a hillside at just the right time in the satellite's elliptical orbit, the place was invisible. It was not in any sight line from the train tracks, or any maintained road, or any of the encampments over the foothills along the border for that matter. Trees kept it hidden from the sky. The trail to the cottage from the tracks first ran over rocky ground that hid its entry. You had to know of it to find it. To keep light from escaping, windows were closed at night by policy of Mellor's own devising, and only portable propane-powered heaters were used, accompanied by proper ventilation, of course. This minimized or outright excluded any smoke trail from being visible from the hills. Naturally, this meant keeping supplies around perpetually. When Mellor ran the place, it was always warm and modern inside, and he even excavated back into the hill a bit to expand storage. Quite a lot of progress was made during his time there as a young man in his late teens and early 20s. Now there was no propane, but Insu still kept a lot of contraband around and maintained insulation well. When they got inside, Mellor said, "I've got Bibles and more in my nest." He called the tunnel his nest, and was very careful not to reveal anything about it. "I'll bring them later. But I want to go through this with you first, so let's, here." He went so far as to bring a few beers from Russia in his own pack. "You just got off work. Have this, crack your joints, take a breath. It's like a holiday! You're very kind, Sneg." And they settled in around the kitchen table. There was a basement, a kitchen, a storage room, and a bedroom. The basement was full of extra nooks, crannies, and other areas for contraband dug into the hillside. Insu sipped the beer and made a very pleased noise, laughing. "Oh, Sneg," he said, and shook his head. "But there's another wrinkle. Before you tell me anything, Sneg, there's an upper regime guy. God pulls him. I would say from our man Durai's influence. But I have no way of knowing that. What I do know is this. There's a quickening from the patriotic year. You have heard?" Mel sighed. "That's the whole reason I'm here." "This thing is of God," I felt it, Snake. They spent most of the beer in about 3 hours going over the information Green Colia passed along, which Mellor printed and brought in tangible format. Mellor also presented his going idea for how to get in, though it did have problems. He brought various tools along with him, but wasn't sure if he would or could use them. During the presentation, he also had an opportunity to tell the tale of getting pressured into the caper. Insu was very entertained and also a lightweight, so that enhanced the storytelling. He loved how Mel tricked Colia when he picked up the cash a few days later, and how he filled out his grocery list on the way in using Russian flea markets. Insu greatly appreciated how old Sneg always had a good anecdote or two about his own rascality. But as the night wore on, Insu became more serious. The collateral meaning of the pale foreigner's ambitions came home, and at one point he said, "You're going to need a distraction, aren't you?" His skinny old finger was pointing to a schematic of Kyumsusan Palace of the Sun. "It's an option," Insu nodded. "Sneg, did you know some in Korea knew of this cube thing before it came? This is all, it's been thrown at me, old friend. I learn new things by the day. Our dear leader keeps some of the world's sharpest minds focused on all manner of nuclear projects, and that means particle physicists. And one of them, he had a vision, Snake, and an idea, and he came to us." "How do you know he's not going to double-cross?" "That's what I'm here to do for Kolya, because that's what the regime wants to do to him. Tell me I'm wrong. Seems to the our modus operandi around these parts, no?" Insu chuckled. "Yes, but no. Our man has proved his sincerity, shall we say. Some good people I know would be dead were this not the case. Before he had his Damascus Road experience, he was responsible for the deaths of many. He's turned a corner, all right. For goodness sake, you should have seen me in the 80s. I must have turned some corners myself. Anyway, he is still in Pyongyang, and he will be where this cube is, even now, Snake." "What was his vision?" "He will tell you." Mellor nodded slowly. "If you're going to reach out by the network," this is what Mellor called the church. But in fairness, again, by dint of necessity, it did intersect with a number of black market operations. "That's what, several days? Yes, to relay this message. I've got 5.5 now. Then it's the exchange. It's a 10-day walk. It's a 4-day train ride. It's an 11-hour car ride. I take a motorcycle, who knows? But my time is short. The best to do what we do before the exchange happens at the end of the week then." "The night before," Mellor nodded. "Don't worry. I said he is very high up in the government." Insu pulled out a phone. Mellor incidentally spit beer. "You've got cell phones in North Korea now." "A couple of the party heads have little dogs on leashes too. This generation's flavor of dictator supposes if he gives us technology, pets, and theme parks, we'll forget the concentration camps. He's more right than he should be. Can't that be traced? Isn't it listening in?" "No," Insu said, and showed him where the cameras, speakers, and microphones had been crudely blocked or removed. "Only text. Tracing goes to the nearest town, where the signal bounces Chinese software monitors. Where the signal bounces. Chinese software monitors everything, but I'm in pattern. We're well inside expected use." He typed these Korean words into the text box. "Praise our dear leader of the mountains, from sea to sea and the northernmost lands." It was a code. There was only One contraband cache in that part of North Korea. Mellor didn't know the full details of the code system, but he knew the network he had tapped into, if it didn't wither and evaporate, would be stronger than it ever was when he was around. It seemed Insu indeed kept the contraband tree watered. The codes were still in use. Okay, said Insu. Knocked the bottom of the beer bottle so a few final drops came out, licked his lips, sighed, then carefully placed the bottle in a bag with the other empties. They would be repurposed. He turned back to the table. Our man will be here in no less than 24 hours, as few as 11 if he comes by car and bribes properly. He's got that kind of freedom. Yes, Snake. I have a car too, you know. Why you walk home every night then? Do you have any idea what it's like to get gas out here? Mellor chuckled. I suppose that's fair. You're absolutely sure there's no honeypot situation here. If there is, God is the one who is trapping the bear. Mellor blew through his lips, then gave Insu a serious look. One thing I did not tell you yet. I'm going to be, well, no, I'm a dad, Insu. Kolya, he's holding this over me. I have a daughter. You understand? What's her name? I don't know. But her reality, this has been proven. Ah, so. Insu smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. Even so, this is the best move, our Snake. We stay until he comes. The matter was settled. They continued to catch up until fatigue took both men. Insu claimed the bed, while Mellor stretched out on a divan he smuggled in 20 years ago, piece by piece. Both men were quite surprised when they were awakened within 2 hours of going to sleep by harsh, insistent knocking. It would have been terrifying, but Insu sat up without a hint of grogginess and said, That's the code. Is he angry or what? Yeesh. Was that 11 hours? Mellor yawned. Insu squinted in the dark of the cottage. No, Snake, it's only been 2 or so. Mellor sobered fast and had a gun in his hand. He felt about himself and quickly gave another firearm to Insu, whispering, Is that periscope thing I installed still there? Insu admitted, and crept to the shuttered window by the front door. There was a little metal rectangle in the building's wood. He slid it aside and looked in the mirror, which showed the reflection from another outward-facing mirror hidden in a triangular notch of siding about 1 inch wide. It was the third row up from the ground, and the mirror was angled high. I can't see. It looks like only one man, he whispered. Answer it. I'll be out of view. And Mel held up the gun in the dark. Insu couldn't see, but caught the drift. The old man made his way to the door, turned on a light in the room, and opened it while Mellor stood behind. Suddenly, Insu's eyes lit up, and he said, Malkin, did you fly? Let me in! Let me in! Of course! Insu stood back and let him in. Mellor approached from the shadows with his gun trained on the man's head, closing the door, double-checking the blinds were pulled, and turning on another light. This Malchin was a skinny little fellow in full North Korean combat uniform, including an old AK-47. He was short, drawn, clean-shaven, and dark-eyed. He certainly looked like he goose-stepped right out of Pyongyang. Just don't move, Mellor said. What? No, okay. No, sir, I am... Put that gun on the floor slow. Kick it over to him. Of course. The man did so. Insu said, It's okay. This is the guy. But he did pick up the gun, shouldering the strap and turning to the man in uniform. However did you get here so fast? I left Pyongyang immediately after the incident at the ceremony on the day of Songnon. Malchin replied, breathing hard, sitting at the table and practically deflating. I've been at the nuclear power plant over the mountain. Oh, Insu considered. Is this the Russian bastard you tell me about from 20 years ago? Malchin pointed at Melor. I'm nobody. I was not here. You were not here. None of us were here. This is Russian Robin Hood. Malchin made another vague gesture. It's the nickname you were given, Sneg. It didn't really catch on till you were long gone. Insu turned back to Malchin, finger pointing to a sketch of a cube on the table. He is Russian Robin Hood, and you're not going to believe this. In fact, look, see the schematics? Malchin looked down and then stood up fast, knocking the chair away. This made Melor flinch bad enough he nearly fired, then realized he was too jumpy, and holstered the gun to avoid a mishap. He practiced commendable trigger discipline, but the noise rattled him even so. Malchin didn't notice from where he stood under dim light. Where did you? He came to steal it, Insu clarified. For Black Ivan, no, Green, not Black Ivan, Green Kolya, yes? Maybe, Melor agreed. But how did he know? Well, there was the broadcast. Okay, I see why you had me come. But I'm scared what it means. I can feel it in my... But there must be a soul. Insu nodded and pursed his lips. Can you get it to him? Or can you get him to it? Malchin stood and began to pace. Well, the thing weighs 10 pounds. It's about the size of one of those, what did they call them in the West? Rubik's Cube. I haven't got through all emails on it. They say it lifts easy enough, but we are under strict instructions outside weighing it not to move it. When did you get email privileges? Insu wondered. This put Jiang Malchin in a category shared by only around 2,000 people in the whole country. The dynasty, their parliament, and the heads of other departments. Oh, 2 years ago, Malchin muttered. It's less restricted than what the people get, but it's still... I'm running a molecular physics program, aren't I? Of course I have some internet. I forget, Insu acknowledged. Do you know what this thing is? Malchin said, thwacking the blueprints on the table. Melor shook his head. It doesn't matter. It's 10 pounds, I can hack it. I just need to get it, and I need the path out. Mr. Russian Robin Hood, you misunderstand the situation. I would have nothing more than to give this thing to you on a capitalist diamond platter of gold and platinum. To get it out of here, I alone, perhaps, among all the people in the earth, know what that thing is and what it means. I want it out of here. It means total annihilation. It means the real nuclear holocaust, not some propaganda post-war dystopia rattled off to keep our people from being jealous, to keep them trusting our greedy, blood-sucking parliament, to keep them worshipping those fat fakers reveling around the Yongsan. I'm talking about the total Mad Max package, little brother. And he slammed his fist on the table. What, is it some kind of cocaine plutonium? Melor quipped. Ha! See how funny I find you? No! It's not that at all. It's, CERN, CERN. You know CERN? The Large Hadron Collider. Not personally. Melor took a seat, and the scientists followed suit. Such wit. Where did you find the Russian Robin Hood in New York? See, I'm funny too. Look, never mind. The Large Hadron Collider. It's... Molecular physics and Indian mysticism have a lot more in common than you might think. And that reality is the only reason the regime lets us explore those texts. The God particle is the Higgs boson, yes? Well, in Vedic philosophy, this is believed to be the golden egg. No, sorry. The golden embryo. Hiranyagaba. God bless you. Don't derail my thinking. CERN, India, Hiranyagaba. You think, well, Vedic iconography at CERN, that's just Indian scientists with fundamentalist background, and they're mapping their religion over modern science for cultural reasons. But no, in the 60s, India gave that facility a statue of Lord Shiva practicing the Nataraj dance to symbolize what is known as Shakti. Yes? This is a sort of life force, if you will. But Shiva is the god of destruction and creation, understand? What does any of that have to do with molecular physics? The world is a hologram. I mean, it's not a hologram, but it is a hologram, like in the Western space movies, the floating 3D picture that you can wave your hand through. Well, we are solid, but the distance between an atom and an electron is greater than, say you have a soccer ball as the nucleus, the electron is 2 miles away, you follow? 2 miles of emptiness. What holds the universe together when everything is mostly empty space? What does that? Enter the Higgs boson, a fundamental field giving electrons and quarks mass and facilitating their relationship with nuclei. And CERN has discovered it, yes? So what does that have to do with Shiva? Malchin was getting excited. He stood again and began a pace. Mellor looked at Insu, who made a dismissive hand gesture with a nod and a grunt, as if to say, let him cook. Malchin was going to keep cooking anyway. The Indians had a belief that derived from ancient China, ultimately, the Chaldeans of the oldest variety. All the old texts speak of an undertaking once pursued by all mankind. Some call it Star Tower. Some call it the Ziggurat. Some call it Babel. They were doing something there, like what is done in CERN. What they were doing is they were transforming ideas into things, but not in the proper way. If you write a thought down, that's really transmutation. The alchemists wanted to turn lead into gold, but their greed blinded them. A thought is something. A written sentence is something else. You have taken something that was not and made it something that is by the action of your hand and your mind, working in concert through a field of consciousness somehow projected at the submolecular level that we don't understand at all. You see, I equals E. Do you understand? I before E, except after C? Mellor quipped in English. Malchin waved a hand at him and continued pacing. The I is the idea. It's the logos, the truth. The E is energy. He actually used Korean characters as he made this description, but the meaning was the same. So an idea becomes energy. We've just made a metaphysical link. Now our brains, they do this all the time. It's the function of consciousness. We don't know what consciousness is. They say, what is consciousness? Being self-aware. What is being self-aware? Being conscious. What does it mean to be self-aware? To think thoughts in your mind. There's no regime. There's no regime that can get to the thoughts in your mind. What does that mean, huh? Why do we have one kind of consciousness and animals another, huh? What does that all mean? How does this indefinable thing exercise will over matter? How can a thought control anything? And yet it does. You see, there's nuclear energy, there's electrical energy, there's steam energy, there's magnetism, and there's thought energy. Which is all well and good, but how do you harness thought energy? See, that's what the ancients figured out. It's a molecular process,
It involves vast quantities of energy, and it can initiate some sort of chain reaction. In fact, whatever this machine was in that Babel ziggurat star tower, they turned it on and boom! There was a reaction, and it rearranged reality from the molecular level up. Now, some say God split languages. I don't know that I disagree. And I pray, if there is a God, I hope he lets me be a janitor in heaven, because the blood on my hands, I deserve nothing more. But the lingual split, it could be an indicator, no? How could they nuke themselves and live to tell about it? Whatever the case, in many legends, what resulted was this transmutation of perfect gold from thin air. This is also probably incorrect. What they did was coherently align willful intention of mental energy toward a common goal and harnessed the numinous. They put reins on Higgs boson particles, at least in terms of framework, on the Higgs field. And then when they took it out for a spin, they realized that perhaps that stallion was not yet tame. Instead of raw, coherent energy in a skyward pillar around which the great edifice could be built, they got a flash of anti-light in a shockwave and a perfect solid gold cube pushing through our reality from beyond, owing to their thought energy's attractive force. This caused the shockwave when the cube instantaneously displaced molecules in a universally fundamental sense. It was one thing for water to rush in and chase out oxygen. The water is being traded for the oxygen. But in our universe, matter can neither be created nor destroyed. Do you understand? They brought matter from another realm of reality into ours. Thus came a flash of anti-light, the molecular shock wave, and the lingual domino effect. So it was somehow that cube was lost to time and legend, while mankind, in turn, lost unity, embraced new tongues, drifted apart, and forgot. Now, if North Korea has this cube, and we can reverse engineer it, which let me tell you we can do, we will learn this molecular superpower. We will be able to streamline it and produce it in the same way as the ancients. Maybe, maybe not. Will we use it fairly and equitably if we are able to harness it? Of course not. It is to nuclear energy what binary computing is to quantum computing. And I know something about quantum computers. Yes, little Russian Robin Hood, North Korea has a quantum computer, a quantum artificial intelligence, a QAI even. And it is fundamental to molecular physics. And the sacrifices made for that knowledge, they weigh on me. Oh, they weigh on me. The energy of the quantum device will be put to use on that cube, and the damn crime lords we call government will rule the world in a month from the time that happens. It's really so powerful, Mellor wondered. It changed the language of mankind at the genetic level and caused a social meltdown. Haven't you heard of the Mandela effect? Mellor screwed up his eyebrows. Everybody thought Nelson Mandela was dead, but he wasn't. Widespread false memories shared by massive numbers of people, Malchin said. Imagine being able to harness that power. Imagine the Juche religion of the North Korean dynasty force-fed to mankind in such a way mankind never knew things weren't as they had become. A nuclear bomb at least ends the pain. This will put us all in hell. So if you take it, Russian Robin Hood. But know that I doubt very much your buyer in Siberia will do much better with it. I just know he will not do worse.
He's actually in Moscow, but yeah, I'll probably have to go through Siberia.
So you see what the issue is, clarified Insu. Before he could respond, Malchin was speaking again. I reached out 6-7 months ago. I wrote down the formula for what I understand of this concept. You see, I've done my homework on it. I equals E. Ideas are energy. I dreamt this cube here, in these schematics, sitting on the shrine of the great leader in Pyongyang. You know what I dreamed? I dreamed it was taken by the dear leader, and before the whole country, he dropped it on the ground, and it pulled the cement and earth and magma with it, and the great pit was opened, and out of the pit came darkness, and I ran, but there was no running, and our dear leader laughed like it was the finest joke he ever heard, and so did the South Koreans, and the Chinese, and the Russians, and the Americans. But soon the cloud went to them as well, and they no longer remembered how to laugh as the darkness took them, and we were all together in the darkness, all stinking and dirty and wounded, and we could not move, any of us. Then came 2 dragons, a green one, like emerald in the sun, and one like a fat bird of paradise that grinned with rotten joy. And they withstood one another amidst darkened waves of pain coming from the cube, and fought until within their contest all was drawn back through endless holes in the fabric of reality, like stars in the sky. The darkness writhed and spun as a cyclone turned on its side, tumbling, howling, and roaring back to that little golden cube until it had sucked all the dark inside. The dragons still fought each other, and I realized they both meant to take the cube, but only one would be able to. So they exhausted themselves one on another, and when they looked where the cube had fallen, it faded away and I woke. The next day I could not get the dream from my mind, and the idea of it totally consumed me until I saw a cat and a bird, and the idea to eat the bird overcame the cat, and it hit me. It was the idea that impelled the animal, much as we human creatures are impelled into action by propaganda, and this produces real energy. So I wrote the paper, and I deliberated before I sent it over the fence. I never heard back from anyone. I eventually risked reaching out to the mad ones like Insu.
Are we so mad? Insu chuckled.
Well, no, you're just right. Malchin sighed. But since then, I've seen no dragons, good or bad. Maybe you are a dragon, Mr. Russian Robin Hood. Be careful then, if you get your cube, as you may have to fight another.
Mellor made a coughing noise. He'd begun smoking at some point. You got a lot to say, sir. Thanks. I'll be careful, but I'm going to need your help.
My help?
Malchin screwed up his eyebrows.
Well, you're the top brass scientist guy with the internet, aren't you?
Mellor smirked.
Oh, said Malchin. I see.
He eyed Mellor sideways.
May I have one of those?
Sure. Mellor gave him a cigarette. Malchin didn't say another word until he finished smoking, then turned to Mellor.
You should not give the cube to your mafia boss either. You should throw it in the sea and let it be lost to time.
I have a daughter.
So?
Oh.
Yes, well, that's good leverage for the mafia then, Malchin nodded.
Yes. Still, the powers of the world should not have that thing. I tell you, it is a curse. I'm not here for a deep discussion on metaphysics, Malchin. I've got a job, and here's what I'm thinking. Mellor shuffled around schematics on the table until there was a top-down blueprint of Cum Susan Palace of the Sun, minimized on an average-sized computer printout. He explained their options: entry by air, escape by water in the nearby river, and others, but admitted he had no idea of ground condition. It's completely impenetrable, Malchin interrupted. Rotating guard, they're like bees in a beehive, and look at you. You're white as a sheet on the dear reader's bed. You'll stick out. If you smack a beehive, don't all the bees come out to get you? Mellor asked. What if I'm inside and somebody else smacks the hive? Nobody could see my white sheet paleness then, huh? Malchin leaned back and shared a look with Insu, then said, That's a different strategy, all right. Mellor pointed to the table. I've got a few scenarios here, but you know why I came up here, Russian Robin Hood? Why? To get scientific equipment. I don't have any ideas what equipment to get. I just had to get away. So this is what I said. But you know what I absolutely must bring back when I return? Scientific equipment. And you know our North Korean equipment, well, we have not had the infrastructure to miniaturize so well. A digital tablet can do what 10 floors of machine could, but we still need them for this and that, which is why it's so alarming when our dear reader destroys such a thing before our eyes. I think I see where you're headed, Mellor said, and felt himself smiling despite it all. So it was they finished their planning, and before meeting again, Mel brought the Bibles from his nest, and Malchin acquired the right equipment. Yang Malchin returned to Pyongyang the following night after finishing paperwork on a variety of equipment, some of which measured electromagnetic fields, some of which seemed to have no immediately identifiable function. The equipment was shipped by train because logistical realities around budget prevented air travel in such a circumstance. As such, the transit was several days. Mellor had a little Japanese-style hotel room and avoided MRI. That is to say, he had enough space to move. They cleared it out so he could make the trip while hidden inside the machine. The lights of the defunct MRI did turn on and the great magnetic donut spun, but the mechanism didn't work. Thankfully, it was large enough a segment of circuit boards and more could be cleared out, leaving Mellor enough room to stretch. He stayed in the machine when they loaded him in. When the train began its journey, he popped out the maintenance hatch to the side, stretched his legs, walked about, and thought how things were going to go. Insu sent food along with him, and he brought a few toiletries. The sliding door on the boxcar could be cracked a foot or so, allowing him opportunity to dispose of his refuse while the train trundled down the tracks. It wouldn't do to have anyone discover evidence of residency in the car when it arrived. He had to be clandestine. Refuse was only disposed of in transit at night when the train was on a left-facing curve, as this pushed his car out of view of any soldiers on front or back cars who might see something thrown from a door. The train did make frequent stops between towns, too, so Rohan had to pay attention. So Mellor had to pay attention. The trip seemed to drag on forever, and indeed the train would only arrive the day before the exchange that Kolya would attend in some way. In Mellor's mind, they were cutting it close, but it was a better plan than he would have been able to manage on his own. When he finally arrived, Insu, Malchin, and Mellor figured out several distraction ideas that were viable, two of which would be used. The one Mellor thought The one Mellor brought to the table involved the extra equipment he stashed in the cave. Some of it wouldn't be needed. He brought along diving gear because his initial escape concept involved retreating to the river behind the palace and using a rebreather for a few miles until he could come to a camouflaged boat. But Insu and Malchin informed him of new surveillance that made this plan defunct. However, he also brought ample cloth, a few drones, and some explosives, as well as a hot air engine designed to inflate and float a big balloon. A very big balloon, one that could lift some things into the sky absolutely silently, and which would have a big night black canvas, totally invisible. It would show up on infrared, which was where Insu's distraction would come into play, a scheme to monopolize security resources in the immediate area. As it turned out, the sequence of the cube interrupting the state ceremony and the dear leader declaring a patriotic year also produced a profound result in the public, many of whom were continuously gathered around the palace in patriotic fervor and seldom refrained from belting out patriotic hymns to the regime. This put the regime in an awkward position. The cult of personality could not be denied, but it was causing traffic problems, and there was never traffic in Pyongyang. It was also a very new issue, and the proper course of action just wasn't immediately clear. There was now an increased security presence, and all of its energies were focused on pilgrims in their hundreds who would swell to their thousands every weekend. The night before the exchange was a Sunday, and Insu could rile a crowd. He was one of the elders in the Church of North Korea, after all. A prayer vigil from the world's richest church in the world's most nightmarish country doesn't look like it does in freer countries, as prayers and hymns must be to the Hermit country's dynasty. What it looks like is super fans going wild, like Beatles fans. But there will be a certain group among the masses that has a different aura about them, for their mental intentions, their words, their songs are not to the dynasty, even though they sound as though they are. So when the trucks from the train tracks arrived, there was the largest crowd yet outside Kyum-Susan Palace of the Sun. They were well beyond curfew, but they sang the praises of the dynasty and shouted patriotic slogans, and security forces were strictly prohibited from violent action. As was the case with North Koreans perpetually, the people found their loophole and the regime was in check until they found their own. At the back of the crowd, spurring on the varying dynastic hymns, was Insu himself, dressed for the weather, nourished to withstand long passionate display, and practically yodeling off-key through a bullhorn. Leadership couldn't manage the cult of personality around the dynasty. Leadership couldn't damage the cult of personality around the diamond. Take 3. Leadership couldn't damage the cult of personality around the dynasty, and this issue was the cube on the great leader's final resting place directly concerned that. Take 4. Leadership couldn't damage the cult of personality around the dynasty, and this issue with the cube on the great leader's final resting place directly concerned that religious dynasty. There was an argument to be made that it was fundamentally without the prerogative of the government to restrict its people from their patriarch's mausoleum to begin with. These were God figures, they were father figures, they were mischievous figures like Santa Claus as well, all rolled into one. So cordoning off the tombs was in fact a bit of a scandal even government officials felt ashamed of, but everyone was in a corner on this one. Mellor was well within the empty space of the MRI, said machine being stacked alongside half a dozen other pieces of equipment in the back of a covered military truck that must have been built in the 40s, grumbling slowly through chanting masses to the entry of the palace, where said truck was waved onto the grounds by troops in their Marxist brown fatigues. As Mellor heard the crowd outside the machine become less raucous, he realized they were wheeling up to the palace itself. He kept absolutely silent and tried not to smirk as soldiers moving the equipment complained about its weight. It took a good 30 minutes for him to be transported from the back of the truck to where they set up operations around the cube. He could hear there were dozens of people around him, and that meant it was time for part 2 of the distraction plan. The furthest extent of the drone pushing the balloon could receive signal. The furthest extent the drone pushing the balloon could receive signal was 5 miles. The signal would be coming right from Kyum-Susan Palace of the Sun, so it would be initially assumed to be part of the regime's activity there,
even if it were noticed. It wouldn't cause any immediate alarm, because the signal was bouncing information from a satellite to an IoT receiver on the engine of the hot air balloon. Said balloon had been inflated and was waiting hidden in the darkness of the hills northeast of Pyongyang. At least that should have been the case. Mellor would soon discover if Insu's people in the network got it done. He booted up the controller and was greeted with a choppy camera feed and sluggish controls. But he was controlling something. They had it up. Mel was sure control sensitivity would align as he got nearer with the balloon. It didn't have to be that maneuverable anyway, just get to a general area over the palace. He had no doubt someone would notice the internal signal from his controller eventually, but they'd have to narrow down where it was coming from, and when they came to a stationary MRI, that would certainly be confusing. It took about 10 minutes to get the balloon high enough, and then he started bringing it in with the drones. Winds aloft were non-existent, thankfully, which was a blessing, as that could have made things very complicated. Once he got the remote-controlled balloon where he wanted it, about 600 feet in altitude, he cut flame. If the North Koreans were any good at all, they'd have the balloon on radar. But it was barely above foothills to begin, and it would be a hard target at night, especially with the 50s tech on those jets. It was also invisible to any on the ground from that height. It had no lights to make it stand out. Only a passing cloud could have revealed it without infrared or some other tool. Otherwise, it was just a dark spot in the heavens, occasionally hiding stars. Eyes on the screen of the wireless controller in his hand, Mellor slowly piloted the balloon until it was right over Kim Susan's westernmost premises. It took about 10 minutes. When he had it in place, he activated the speaker. It screamed out in a rage-filled AI approximation of a Korean woman, bragging that a poison bomb was about to drop and everybody on the ground better run for their lives. Mellor could see the response from the camera on the balloon. It took about a minute, but abruptly half the people outside the palace scattered, half stayed, and he could see soldiers coming out, staring at the sky, yelling into radios, waving their arms, then pointing their guns in the general direction of the balloon. They'd start shooting soon, or a 50s-era jet would come roaring in and try to shoot down the balloon, in all likelihood colliding with it. Mellor activated the release catch, and a 50-pound stink bomb of nothing lethal dropped, spitting green haze as it spun down on the western end of the building. This device had LEDs on it and screamers, and between the flashing screams and noxious green was a terrifying sight in the night. Even inside the MRI in the center of the palace, Mellor thought he heard cries of alarm, but he concentrated on his task. He needed to wait just a little longer before he blew up the balloon. Klaxons started hooting, and he could hear panicked voices and footsteps. Something jostled his machine hard, and someone exclaimed in muffled Korean, "Sorry, Comrade Jang!" "Watch where you're going!" Jang Malchin yelled back, and then Mellor heard the steps retreat. That was the signal. Mellor had at least 2 minutes to hop out, grab the cube, and send the execute command to blow the balloon up from the handheld detonator, then leave the opposite direction wearing a gas mask to hide his whiteness. From there, he'd just let Insu's network spirit him back to his nest on the border. They'd probably stick him on another train. Certainly there was indoor surveillance at the palace, but the eyes on that surveillance would be elsewhere until things died down. And by the time they reviewed footage, noticing some gangly Caucasians skittering about their midst, it would be much too late. Very carefully, Mellor unlatched the compartment and leaned it open a crack, looking out the side. He didn't see anybody. He very gingerly slid out, fully dressed in North Korean fatigues, including a hat. He held the gas mask in his left hand and the detonator for the plastique on the balloon in his right. He put it in a pocket to don the mask, and getting that alien mask on so quick may just have saved him. There was a zippered, airtight plastic tarp surrounding a glass coffin with the great leader underneath, altogether making an enclosed room about the size of a modest home's entertaining area. Real red and white flowers in neat circular arrangements surrounded the rectangular glass, but were interspersed with a variety of sensory input apparatuses aimed at the cube atop the glass. Cameras were zoomed in close, and details of the translucent cube could be made out on wide LCD screens set up in circumference. A thin veneer of green gas was coming into the space. The spinning canister with its blinking LEDs must have broken through a window along the roof and nearby. The stake was there, all right. The defunct MRI out of which Mellor crawled was at the edge of the plastic-enclosed traveling laboratory surrounding the departed tyrant. Looking around quickly through the plastic visor of the gas mask, he fast confirmed he was alone, then began to make his way to the cube. Floodlights were suddenly everywhere, and the plastic tarps dropped with a whoosh of departing air. Malchin was shoved forward, and Mellor perceived perhaps a dozen armed soldiers stepping in from blinking shadows punctuated in emergency lights. A man in black sunglasses leveled a gun at Malchin's head, barking out in Korean, "What kind of American bastard trick is this?" Bureau 13. Malchin was laconic and looked stunned. The man with the sunglasses smashed the gun into Malchin's head and said, "You think nobody noticed you disappear immediately after this thing showed up?" He gestured at the cube. "You think Bureau 13 wouldn't be involved in this kind of thing?" "Comrade Choi, there is a threat to the state." "Don't play games with me, traitor!" He banged the gun against Malchin's head. "You've joined the mad ones that believe in some bearded white man in the sky." "There is God!" Choi cried. No, that's got to be Malchin. Sorry, I wrote this. "There is God!" Malchin cried. Suddenly his laconic veneer faded and he straightened up, then turned to face the gun. "Well, he sure didn't teach you how to be a spy. Tell him to work on that with the next guy." "Christ!" screamed Malchin. Choi squeezed the trigger. There was an echoing boom. Malchin's body fell to the ground, mangled and full of twitches, bleeding life away. Mellor felt weak in the knees and didn't move. He'd seen a lot of things, but that was brutal, and it was all he could do not to immediately lose hope, especially since he was next. Choi turned the gun on him, barking, "You! Mask off!" Mellor slowly obeyed. "Oh, look at that! He's vanilla! On the ground!" Mellor slowly started to crouch. There was a low thump, a brightly colored flash following it. Mellor didn't blow the balloon. What was it? Choi and all the other soldiers looked up directly behind Mellor, and they looked astonished. 100 feet behind, at the exit to the chamber of the great leader, which led on the wide corridor, in the midst of strobing emergency beacons, a violet seam split in the world, and a 2-ton pickup, decked out like a South Korean police truck, roared through at 40 miles an hour, brights on. There was a man in the bed of the vehicle with an automatic rifle, strapped in behind the cab, and he didn't take long to find targets and start picking them off. Behind the truck remained a swirling portal of madness, 4 times its width, giving on a world beyond the mind's grasp. Just when the eye was able to get an idea what it was seeing, the portal whooped shut, leaving a bright afterimage. The truck swerved, but kept on. The North Koreans began to return fire, but they were scrambling, and none got any shots off that meant anything. Mel scrambled himself, making a dash for the cube atop the glass over the dead despot, while the men from Bureau 13 under sunglasses played a game of spray and pray as they dove out of the way. Perception limned in pure adrenaline, Mellor felt horror as he saw time slow. A mote of brightness jumped out of the middle of the air above the dictator's glassy tomb, expanded and grew until it was an oval window into another world of twilight, beauty 7 feet off the ground, right over the dead dictator. A black cat with a white foot flew through the window, followed by a young woman who landed on the glass, bent down, snatched the cube with some effort, then looked up. She saw a huge truck coming right at her, heard gunfire blasting away the ability to think, and perceived a visual cacophony of lights like crimson lightning. The girl seized up, screeched, and fell off the glass cover, pitching sideways into flowers, knotting her arms around the cube held to her chest and wailing. The cat flat disappeared, scrambling quick as it could away from the ruckus no one knew where, apparently deigning to expurgate somewhere safe. It must have accomplished its goal. Abruptly, the portal atop the glass coffin slammed shut. Choi was the last Bureau 13 man to spray random fire at the truck before leaping for cover. Mellor managed to scramble to where the girl was. She rocked on the ground, crying, Whitey-paw, in Japanese. She kept the cube gripped to her tightly. Mellor would have had to fight her to get it loose. He elected to worry about it later. Come on! He grabbed her hand and pulled as hard as he could, yanking her from the ground as the truck plowed right into the MRI. The area was wide enough to complete a turn, which the vehicle did. This knocked half a dozen machines rolling into the glass coffin of the great leader with a crash that sent one Bureau 13 man stumbling into flashing darkness like a strobe light acrobat. The man in South Korean military garb in the bed of the truck saw Mellor's pale face and the jean-clad Japanese girl crouched in bouquets, quickly doing the math. He crouched himself and took several shots at discomfited guards, waving his free hand and yelling, Move it! Some of the Bureau 13 men were regaining composure, and Mellor remembered the plastique on the balloon. He stuck his hand in his pocket and hit the switch. The bang was loud. The girl screamed. Everyone instinctively ducked, and Mellor threw her into the back of the truck's bed like a sack of potatoes, barely piling in as it started accelerating the way it came at full speed. Up front, the windshield was peppered in bullet impacts. The bulletproof glass hadn't been pierced yet. Through the glass, Mellor could see a swarthy-skinned man in a goatee behind the wheel. Beside him, the soldier who came in blazing had ducked with them in the bed, occasionally returning fire. He took a shot and ducked flat, then yelled, Stay down! The girl kept screaming, braced against the tailgate, clutching the cube to her center. It seemed to glow. Mellor took the man's advice as the bullets whistled past overhead, occasionally caroming off the rear of the cab. That's when he noticed a fat, wall-eyed cat through the window. It was sitting on the dashboard like it owned the vehicle. Despite the maelstrom, the cat seemed about clueless. Hold on! Hold on! Came a burst over the loudspeaker of the truck. It was from the swarthy-skinned man driving. He turned the cat around so he was facing forward and ducked low over the passenger seat, shaking beef jerky in front of the oblivious animal. The cat ate it and abruptly flattened out in convulsion on the dashboard as a rip in reality tore up the middle of time and space immediately ahead. As before, this portal was massive enough for 4 trucks and the vehicle rolled through. The Indian man grabbed the cat as they passed the threshold of the window to another world, shaking him like a rag doll till he puked and growled. Couldn't have been more than a second. What the hell? Mellor snapped from the back. Stay down! The soldier in the back jumped out of the bed and he was shooting. Indeed, there were sounds of shouting, and when Mellor glanced over the edge of the truck bed, he saw another man in South Korean army gear facing off against several in brown uniforms who had pursued after. The truck rolled into a forest somehow, where there was cover and apparently scant reinforcements. But what a forest it was, like nothing Mellor ever saw. A twilight emerald green that almost made the eyes tear up all around, and a low mist. Unexpectedly, someone threw a rock in the bed of the truck, which Mellor fast realized was a grenade. He pitched it back where it came from quick as he could, and it detonated 10 feet from the truck, still in air, instigating a number of surprised exclamations from behind. The girl shrieked. Be calm, Mellor rasped in Japanese unhelpfully. Directly in front of the truck was another portal, with an older man in a modern priestly garb holding another cat. Presently, he was mid-duck, looking astonished. Apparently, the fellows in South Korean combat fatigues scared off the men from Bureau 13. The swarthy fellow exited the cab at some point, joining in the fray. He quickly jumped back in the driver's seat. The man in preacher's outfit jumped in the bed with Mellor and the girl, and the warrior-looking types followed. The group rolled toward the second portal. Before they could get there, a loud thrumming noise filled the sky, followed by a wild indigo light that was everywhere. Mellor looked up and wasn't sure what he was seeing. It was like an unblemished solenoid or soda can, only it tapered in a pattern like many cans or solenoids of such size, halved and stuck together. It had a greenish-purple glow, and he felt himself drawn by blue light in a conical beam. Hold on! A muffled yell made him turn away. The truck burst through the world window, and the priest let go his own cat, who took a moment to expurgate. Looking back, Mellor saw, before the portal closed, half a dozen North Korean men running in slow motion from the trees where they sought cover. Their eyes were no longer on the portal, but had been seduced by terror as they gawked at the sky and began slowly rising from the ground, arms stretched out behind them, mouths open in a rictus of utter terror. The portal iris closed. The Indian man stopped the truck and scratched the wall-eyed cat behind the ears, who made an unclassifiable sound, drooling on a collar with a bit of metal that read Cletus. The man turned, opened the little sliding window, and said, "I'm Ricky Patel of Colm. I've been trying to reach you." "About this truck's extended warranty?" "No, about something important." He glanced to the Japanese girl huddled by the tailgate. "Though I'll admit perhaps not as relevant as if I had found you before. You'll want to be sitting down for this." "I am sitting down." "Well, listen, we'll be talking more in Yakutsk. We got a problem." "What problem?" Mellor said. "Mud," Ricky replied, followed by a number of Punjabi expletives. He jumped out the truck and went for a look. The rear tires were definitely stuck. Mellor hopped out as well. The Japanese girl stayed huddled, whimpering and repeating her cat's name, body wrapped around the cube, rocking subtly against the closed tailgate. The men in South Korean combat garb remained in the truck bed, scanning all horizons. Mellor said, "How did you know I was going to be in the palace tonight, Ricky?" He looked up from the half-sunk tires. "I didn't. Call it a God thing. How in the world did a Russian fellow get in the middle of Kyumsusan Palace of the Sun?" "Chon! Jin! Help me!" The men in combat fatigues nodded, taking up position behind the truck, still scanning horizon lines carefully. "I have my ways in and out of Korea," Mel said cryptically. "Obviously, and I'm getting synchronized into all sorts of situations like this because the world we see is being orchestrated from beyond, you know? A God thing, huh? Don't be too clever. There are things we do not know. Think you can help us push? We're never going to get to Sestra Maya if the DPRK boys are getting to us." "Yeah, hey, thanks, man. Let's just get out of here. You are welcome. One must love his neighbor." "Where are we?" 10 miles south of Pyongyang." 10 miles? We've got maybe an hour if there aren't troops in the immediate vicinity. 15 minutes if there are, max. The portal glow will be noticed for certain. Help them push! Ricky climbed back in the driver's seat. Mellor made his way to the back and leaned into it. They were at it several minutes. The girl never even got up to look around, just continued huddled and murmuring to herself. Ricky shifted to park and jumped out again. Everybody looked at the tires with their hands on their hips. Kyun or Jin said, "Try a floor mat." "Good idea." And Ricky ran to grab one. When he came back, Mellor took the mat from him and crouched down, stuffing it under the left rear tire. "What's in Sestra Maya, anyway?" "That's near Yakutsk, yes?" "Yes, there's an empathy fellow who manages our calm facilities there. Errol," Ricky said over his shoulder, jumping back into the truck yet again. "Errol," Mellor wondered. They rocked the truck again and almost got it, but the floor mat flapped around the tire and was launched behind. Mellor ran into the swampy field to retrieve it, then came back and repositioned the rubber trapezoid. "Go!" Ricky feathered the gas. They pushed and got mud all over them. He gave it gas. They got muddied. The cycle continued. Mellor said, "Hey, Ricky, next time maybe portal in away from the mud field." "We're almost out!" Ricky yelled back. Mellor turned around and leaned into it, pushing with his back, legs sliding in the mud. To his left was the older priestly gentleman, the soldiers on his right. He said, "I'm Mel Preach. Good to meet you." "De," replied the religious man in Korean. "Pak Son Yung." "You boys, army?" Mel said to the other guys. "God's army," said Kyun, and they both chuckled, grunting. "Right," said Mel. He yelled over his shoulder, "Ricky, you ever see a guy with a red mustache and the cat jumping in and out of these portals?" "Just push," Ricky yelled from the front. "Because I saw him in Vegas about 4 or 5 years ago. We'll talk about it. Don't be worrying." Finally, the wheel came out, but by then sirens were perceivable in the distance. "What exactly were you planning anyway?" Mellor said to the driver's side window. "I wasn't planning for you or the girl. I can be telling you that. I was going to go in, spook him with the truck and Kjoln's marksmanship, grab the cube thing, and be spinning away before enough bullets broke the glass. I expected half the men that were there, but I've done similar things, all right? And you came tonight? And you came tonight. Earliest I could come after I got the pastor and his boys updated, then had everybody briefed. It's a complex operation. That it is. Echoed DPRK rhetoric indicated a caravan of troops, Bureau 13 or otherwise, were very near. They were not afraid to use bullhorns. All right, we should go, said Mellor. You think? Ricky put the truck in gear as everybody finished piling in the bed. Then he hit the gas. The portal should have been about 70 yards further. He put the cat on the dashboard and gave him jerky. Cletus made appreciative weird noises and opened a portal just ahead. Then came the Godzilla tier bump. There must have been a hole deeper than the right rear tire. The truck hit hard, and the jarring impact knocked the Japanese girl huddled by the tailgate into said tailgate, and hard enough that, combined with the brutal impact of the bump, the gate opened and she tumbled out. Mellor was nearest and went to grab her as she still clutched that cube, but realized he too was airborne and only managed to mitigate their fall as they both rolled in grass and mud. Why the paw? She began to scream. She'd been murmuring it. Now she was yelling. Mellor pulled her to her feet and brushed her off, grabbing her hand and running after the truck. Come on, we got to get up before the portal. A line of mud jumped in response to a line of fire from the hill beyond the portal, followed seconds later by the report of an assault rifle echoing across the muddy plain. The bullets were tracking the truck, not Mellor or the Japanese girl. Whoever was shooting missed, but they probably wouldn't miss twice. Quiet the paw, continued the girl. Mellor pulled her to the ground and they landed face first in ankle-deep mud, obscured by shoulder-high grass. He looked up in time to see the truck go through the portal, then it became very slow and gradually merged with another further portal, taking several minutes to do so. As this happened, 2 more Korean men jumped in the back of the truck, one holding a cat, all in slow motion, seeming to float up and through the air gracefully, hair levitating, the cat with a very readable and disagreeable expression. Several North Korean troops came running from the far hillside where the gunfire erupted and managed to reach the portal before it closed. They deliberated briefly before deciding to follow. Unfortunately, one of them had a leg dangling out when it irised shut, and only that leg was left behind, twitching in the grass. By this time, Mellor could see a line of trucks ahead, coming from the city of Pyongyang. Behind, there was the river. To the side where the portal had been, there now were a group of soldiers, maybe 20 strong. They came from their own truck, only just missing prey. The bullhorn of North Korean stormtroopers in the distance was bellowing louder. Quiet the paw! He clapped a hand over her mouth. It was dark, and floodlights hadn't splayed over Mellor or the Japanese girl yet. He whispered harshly in her ear, using broken Japanese. I'm sorry for cat. Maybe we find, maybe we don't. But if you are not quiet, we both go meet ancestors. They kill, you hear? Quiet. She whimpered but kept silent, now clutching the cube as tightly as she could. Mellor tensed, then leaned down and whispered again in his bad Japanese. We go to river. Reka, river. I have idea. They kept low in the tall grass, moving as swift and softly as possible. Nobody was looking where they were yet. If they kept silent, it would stay that way. She followed behind, whimpering and leaning into him. Soon they were at the river, and he eased in, whispering, It's cold. Cold, the girl repeated and shivered with a gasp when she got in the water. Shh, stay with me. It's not far.